Undertale is a retro-style indie RPG released in September of 2015 by Toby Fox for Windows and Mac that has gained loads of popularity all over the internet. I recently discovered Undertale about a month ago from word of mouth, and just actually today completed my third playthrough, and I have to say, I now understand all the hype. Undertale has a unique charm to it. You either get it or you don't. Certain players will get more out of this game than others, all depending on one's taste. Now obviously Undertale has its flaws, but I strongly recommend if you haven't given it a try, stop watching this and go download it off Steam or the game's website. It'll only run you $10. For those still watching, let's dive into Undertale. After booting up the game, you are prompted to name your character and shown a short slideshow of Undertale's backstory involving a war between humans and monsters, where humans emerge victorious and banish the monsters where the game takes place, the Underground, hence the game's title. Your character is shown falling down a pit into this world and soon meets several of the Underground's monster inhabitants. Characterization is where Undertale truly shines. Undertale is filled with a constant dialogue in and out of battle, with characters that all have likes, dislikes, hopes, dreams, and fleshed out backstories. I wasn't even an hour into the game before I became a huge fan of Sans the Skeleton and his brother Papyrus. As the player, you are a mute, similar to Pokemon, and have the ability to shape the story via dialogue options and actions in battle, more specifically whether or not you choose to kill or spare monsters you come across in your journey. This leads to one of three major endings the game has to offer. This doesn't really sound groundbreaking from an outsider's perspective. Gamers have been presented with this kind of dynamic storytelling for years, but honestly, I think Undertale does it smarter than several AAA titles today. If the player chooses the genocide or no mercy route, they can expect to find towns they come across abandoned, shops with no shopkeepers, and a general sense of urgency in the air. The game really makes you feel like you're a monster. Drawing heavy influences from Earthbound, Undertale teeters to being very self-aware and quirky, to being, well, very self-aware and morbid, depending on the player's actions, of course. Also, very quickly, because I haven't brought it up yet, Undertale's presentation is great. It looks like a modernized Atari game filled with enlarged 8-bit sprites with a coat of paint in the form of flashy particle effects. Combine this with its great soundtrack and it works. The main theme of the game and the theme of Snowden being my favorites. Your first playthrough of the game will only take around 4 hours to complete, where you will get the neutral ending, unless you have read ahead on how to obtain the others. But by completing the game only once, you've really only scratched the surface of Undertale's whole story. Multiple playthroughs reveal more secrets about Undertale's narrative that I won't go into detail about in this video. You can find hours of lore discussion all over Reddit and YouTube. Despite having Tale in the name, Undertale is still a game after all. Enemy encounters are handled like your traditional Final Fantasy game. Walk around long enough and you'll enter a battle sequence. Battles have you controlling a little heart with the arrow keys, and you're required to avoid obstacles the enemy creates in a confined space. What I really love is how diverse each enemy's attacks can be. Most random encounters play like a Japanese bullet hell game, while some boss encounters shake it up and add Mario-style platformer elements or have the player control a shield to defend themselves from projectiles. Now, don't get me wrong, I had a blast with these battles my first playthrough, as random encounters aren't really too frequent, really helping avoid repetitiveness, although, when going for the genocide ending, the player is required to kill all enemies in all areas of the game. This leads to walking in a circle for half an hour fighting the same set of enemies. On the other end of the spectrum, you can choose not to kill any enemies and spare all bosses to receive the pacifist ending. You get no experience points and remain at level 1 for the entire game. Sparing an enemy is just as dangerous, if not more, than fighting it. This requires you to select a specific set of options under the Act menu in battle until the enemy gives up, or exhausting a boss's dialogue until they're ready to surrender, all while still dodging attacks and eating food to keep your HP up. I like the idea of being able to finish the game without throwing a single punch, but sometimes I wish the route to being a pacifist was just a little more streamlined and clear. What I mean by this is some bosses have special conditions to be met before they're spared. Bosses like Undyne require you to actually run from battle to get the ability to spare her. Now this is fine, but expecting the player to do something they've never been asked to do in the game before with little warning doesn't seem like a good design decision. Keep in mind these criticisms are really just for gaining the 2 additional endings. Don't worry about it on your first playthrough. If you like the game enough the first time you played it, odds are you're probably going to play it again. At the end of the day, Undertale is more about the characters you meet and the stories they give to you. It's an experience to go back and to relive, not a traditional RPG where you hold on to a save file and build your character up to be their very most powerful. Undertale pokes fun at those sorts of traditional games constantly throughout, and that's why it feels so fresh. Should every game follow this formula? Of course not. Sometimes I want a game that tells me the higher my score, the better I am doing. Although game devs should really take notice of Toby Fox's ability to tell a narrative and connect with characters within a game, I read every line of dialogue my first playthrough in Undertale. Compare that to $60 titles like with The Witcher 3 or Fallout 4, where I was skipping dialogue left and right. This isn't that those games weren't worth the money, they made up for it in other areas, but I'd be hard pressed to tell you I had much fun pressing through The Witcher's dialogue options than I did in Undertale's. Regardless, I can shamelessly say Undertale is one of my favorite games of 2015, right next to all the AAA games I played, and it is well worth the $10 admission price. This has been Shannon with OGSP saying stay determined and have a good night.